Hello and welcome to Unstress. My name is Dr. Ron Ehrlich. Now, before I start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I am recording this podcast, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Well, today we explore health at a very granular level, at a functional level. In fact, working out how your body functions is a really important step in not only understanding how to stay healthy, but if you have been diagnosed with the disease, finding out what went wrong and how you can fix it. My guest today shares some wonderful insights and takes us on a wonderful tour of functional health. Reid Davis. Reid is a board-certified holistic health practitioner and a certified nutritional therapist. He's an expert in functional lab testing, and he shares that expertise in a wonderful episode today, and also on holistic lifestyle medicine. He's the founder of Functional Diagnostic Nutrition and the Functional Diagnostic Nutrition certification course with over 4,000 graduates in 50 countries. Look, it's a wonderful conversation. I so enjoyed talking to Reid. There was so many pearls in this interview. I hope you enjoy this conversation I had with Reid Davis. Welcome to the show, Reid.
Thank you, Dr. Ron. It's a pleasure to be here.
Reid, we're going to cover quite a few topics here today, but I wanted to start with stress because stress is a term that people use a lot, and it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. What does stress mean to you?
Well, in 2001, back when I was getting started, I read an article that 50% of all diseases are caused by stress, including 80% of all doctor's visits. And so it's a huge, huge, huge thing. And I started studying it over 20 years ago. So I, over the years, have categorized stress into different places where we interact with it, if you will, or the ways we get stressed out. Most people think automatically when you say stress about the mental, emotional, their jobs or their kids or their relationships or their finances or, something bothering them in that way. But it includes way beyond that. You go up above to psychospiritual. I think not having a purpose in life is stressful. People get up with no purpose and they're all stressed out all the time. But what I also found out in my 10 years as a clinician is that there is physical stress. There's pain and aches and old injuries. Matter of fact, if I had to say what my particular nemesis is, it would be the very well-used body that I am walking around in. And, from injuries and things like that. Everything from motorcycles to kickboxing to surfing and skiing and, all the silly things you do as you're before you get old enough and wise enough. But then there's a course, and this is my background before the health space was environmental law and conservation. And I studied the environment and I realized about the number of chemicals that were killing all the birds, bees, water, trees, things. And that's how I got into the health space, by the way, is I started wondering what's it doing to people. So you have the major categories might be mental, emotional, physical, and chemical or biochemical stressors. And there's a lot to unpack and sort out there. But when you ask me a question, I'm going to give you the answer. And as complex as it might sound, we've actually made it quite simple to understand. And we could go from there.
Well, this actually is music to my ears, Reid, because, we've taken not a dissimilar approach to stress myself in my own practice and in my own writings and podcasts. But it's always so interesting to talk to somebody who has similarly explored it, but a different perspective and adding to that knowledge. Let's dive in a bit deeper and talk about how these various stressors might actually affect our health. I mean, we know they do,
Sure.
but how?
Well, it's quite amazing. I've heard over and over again in the health space that all disease begins in the gut. Even Hippocrates, the father of medicine, disease begins. I don't believe it. It begins with stress, but it circles around to the gut so often and so commonly that it could be looked at that way. And of course, there's a lot of symptoms associated with gut and digestion and all the things. We could go into any level of this you want to, but what I've done is study the hormone, immune, digestion, detoxification lab markers. So I'm considered a very experienced lab testing guy. I've run thousands and thousands of lab tests on thousands of people. And so I started years ago, 25 years ago, and I started recognizing patterns of how with stress, measuring the stress hormones, that starts the initial breakdown of the body. And sure, the other dominoes will fall just like you can predict it. It's so reliable, this idea of stress causing a cortisol to DHEA imbalance. And what that means is that you're catabolic. You're going to be in a catabolic state versus anabolic. You can understand this very clearly. And I'm not sure the level of your audience, but kids, they're anabolic. They're growing, so they're naturally anabolic. They get over anything really quick. They cry for a few minutes, and then they're out playing the next minute, even with pretty serious boo-boos sometimes. Mm-hmm. But with adults, and the accumulated stress, and it doesn't matter, Ron, whether it's mental, emotional, physical, or chemical and biochemical, your body responds the same. You go out of balance into it, more catabolic. And if you're an older you are, you're kind of starting to lean that way. Your body's breaking down more than it's building up. So these hormones have to be in balance to be healthy. And we strive for that. We measure that. That's part of our therapy, if you will, is to balance the catabolic, anabolic, mostly through lifestyle. But of course, what happens when you have chronic stress, some of it you don't even know about. Matter of fact, a very interesting thing about stress and looking for stressors and root causes, there's a recent study from the University of California out of San Diego, which is where I live, and it says that the original stressor that started this downward spiral doesn't even have to be there anymore. But it's the stress of whatever form can start these downward spirals. It screws with metabolism, catabolic, anabolic, leads to the next domino. Now, what people who are under stress will notice, and I could stop and take questions, or I could continue to move along.
No, go on. I'm loving this. This whole catabolic, anabolic balancing beam is really a very nice way of looking at it. Please go on.
Well, it's one way to start the investigation, because I'm a lab guy, so I like to look at labs, and you'll see this catabolic, anabolic imbalance. The next thing to go, and they're right there in the same metabolic pathways downstream from the cortisol and the DHEA, is the sex hormones. Mm-hmm. So people who are all stressed out, take your 45, 50-year-old working maybe 2 jobs, plus kids, plus spouse, plus, they're stressed out. Maybe they've got a couple old injuries from somewhere, and they're using personal care products, household cleaning products, and exposed to things and exposed. So now you get the mental, emotional, physical, and chemical stressors. Guess what? As the catabolic, anabolic gets out of whack, the next thing that goes to sex hormones. Next thing you know, they have low libido. They can't put on the muscle anymore, and they're tired and fatigued for no good reason, and they haven't really earned it. I like to say, through exercise or something. They're just walking around tired. Well, that's not normal. That's not healthy, and those are signs that people they know this about themselves. They know there's a downward spiral somewhere. They can't quite put their finger on it. They may have even been told by some practitioner somewhere, nothing's wrong with you, your blood work looks normal. But we have different little sneaky ways of looking at these markers and discovering the downward spiral of anabolic, catabolic. Now the sex hormones, your testosterone's low, you're in early menopause, you're having trouble with your periods because your estrogen and progesterone are also out of balance. So you have the stress hormones, you have the sex hormones, and then the next thing that's going to fall, if I may,
please,
your immune system. And again, I've run thousands of labs on thousands of people: hormone, immune, digestion, detoxification, energy production, nervous system, on and on and on. And I've used saliva, urine, blood, stool, and kind of sorted that out. What can we use, hopefully, to make it very convenient on people to be done at home, even some of this lab work. And so you see the catabolic, anabolic, stress, sex hormones, all those issues. Then the immune system. And so because cortisol suppresses, it's called secretory or secretory, depending on where you're from, IgA, secretory IgA, which is the main ingredient in the immune system of the gut. So the lining of the small intestine in particular, and other mucous membranes, have this secretory IgA. It's there to defend against things. And you also have the normal biosis. You have good and bad flora. So this gets affected by stress. Believe it or not, just stress alone, and the body doesn't care where it's coming from. Your hormones, your immune system start to downward spiral. So you get less of a defense system. And what happens is that biosis we call it dysbiotic, or you have a dysbiosis. So instead of, the preferred range for the good flora versus unhealthy flora is 80 or 85 to 15 or 20%, roughly. You know this. I'm just saying.
No. Well, I may know it, but I think our listener, would like to hear it. And just to stop you for a moment, because
Please.
Our listener may have heard it and missed it, you were talking about secretory IgA, immunoglobulin A, as a marker.
Absolutely.
That's right.
And it's so easy because you can get it, believe it or not, from the same saliva test that we got your hormones from. So we now have learned to add secretory or secretory IgA to the saliva test with starting the whole chain of events. So with one lab, you're already seeing the catabolic, anabolic, the sex hormones, and now you're even peeking into the immune system. Now, it's not enough. You want to go deeper, but you're getting a clue here that, wow, there's a lot of stress and it's throwing things off and your body's breaking down before your time. And that's why your sex hormones are off, and either your periods, your fertility, your early menopause, or with males, all the things they go through, stuff like that. And oh, by the way, with the reduced secretory IgA, you've got a dysbiosis. So that will produce its own set of symptoms: heartburn, gas, indigestion, bloating, diarrhea, constipation, or the famous alternating diarrhea and constipation. And so you've got now a person who doesn't just feel old, and low libido and can't put on muscle and is tired, and maybe even a little foggy thinking thrown in. Now you've got digestive issues as well. And it can just downward spiral from there. So what I've learned to do is the lab work, and I would do multiple lab work to look at this entire cycle, if you will, of stress being the overriding causal factor, various kinds of stress. And there are other causal factors, diet, wrong diet, for instance, or even worse, chemicals than what we've already mentioned, and so on. And so you get the catabolic, anabolic, sex hormones, immune system, digestive problems, and then as that continues to downward spiral, I think the medical term is bigger, badder bugs. Bigger, badder bugs come along, your parasites, your overgrowth of bacteria, like serious stuff, and even fungus and these kind of things, especially depending on exposure, of course. So now you've got worser things living in the gut, not just a dysbiosis and weak immune system, but because it's weak, critters will move in and they can cause problems of their own. They're very toxic. They produce what are called lipopolysaccharides, or LPS, and that's a form of toxin that will end up going through your whole body. And it's a neurotoxin as well. It can cause severe problems with neurochemistry, the brain chemistry and neurotransmitters and all kinds of things. And I could add in as many layers as you like, because let's just take, for example, with the dysbiosis, too much bad versus good flora. Well, you need that 80%, even 85% good flora to break down protein. So now you're not breaking down protein. Protein is your amino acids. Those are the building blocks of almost everything in your body, and including neurotransmitters. So now if you also feel sad On top of all of this, you go, well, I've got, low libido and I can't build muscle and I'm tired and I have heartburn, gas, indigestion, bloating, and that makes me sad.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting use of word there, Breed, because it's often an acronym for Standard American or Australian Diet too.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah. So
yeah,
the
but
diet,
go on. This is great.
well, the
This is great.
diet's
You're
one
telling
more
people to go.
stressor.
Mm-hmm.
So now I could go a couple ways with this, but with the downward spiral, what we see happening is now the gut lining itself becomes so weak that it starts to, we call it hyperpermeability, as you know, or leaky gut. So you start to leak with this weak mucosal barrier. The secretory IgA is diminished, and you've got all these unwanted bionts living there, and they're producing toxins and even biofilms. It gets kind of nasty in there, and it starts leaking through into the bloodstream. We call it the humoral system. Now, fortunately, initially, it's contained in the hepatic portal system, so it's still going to get caught and go to the liver for the most part. It's not going to just go throughout the whole body, not right away. There are ways that if they're fat soluble, they could go through the lacteals and into the lymph system, but let's just stick with the liver, which is going to carry most of the weight of these toxins and immune complexes and unwanted particles, if you will, floating through. Now, the liver is a pretty big organ. They call it the grandfather in Chinese medicine. And its job is to do additional filtering and processing and excreting of the waste products, purification, and it's supposed to let good things go on. Actually, it sends it back to the heart, which is then pumped out to the rest of the body for all your nutrients and the good things. And so when it's congested, and that's the term we use, it's easily measurable, by the way, in a simple urine test. Congested liver, look at urinary bile acids, or if you have it, urinary bile acid sulfates. So that means that bile is spilling. Bile supposed to be, it's made in the liver to carry the toxins and unwanted things out. So it goes into the gallbladder. It's actually used quite intelligently by the body to help with digestion. The bile and lipase from the pancreas mixes together. It's a very good surfactant and digestive aid. But what happens if you have this congested liver, too much, your liver can't process it all so quickly. So it starts spilling over into the bloodstream, these bile acids, and they're easily picked up by the kidneys and excreted, which is a good thing, but we can measure it. It makes it easy to measure. So now someone has come in and they've said, hey, man, I'm all stressed out and I don't know what to do. And I'm drinking all this coffee all day long just to stay. Then at nighttime, I have to drink alcohol just to get to sleep and on this stuff. And again, they're carrying all the stress around. A lot of it they can't even identify. And we see the catabolic anabolic imbalance, the sex hormone issues. The immune system starts to slip. And then, of course, you get worser and worser. I don't know if those are great words in Australia, but you get my message that things are in this downward spiral. Now your digestion isn't working. Now you're not really getting nutrients out of that great food you're spending all that money on, or growing yourself, or whatever it might be. And so you've got the symptoms. You're self-medicating, and if you can't intercede on yourself and change some things, can get pretty serious with now, because when you get leaky gut and dysbiosis, leaky gut, and a liver that's spilling over, which again is pretty easy to detect, well, that can start the immune system really on fire, and your body can start attacking itself, which is called autoimmunity. And, there's just, I don't know, I think 151 different autoimmune diseases. Yeah, maybe there's new ones invented since I read that somewhere, because you can't keep up with all the data that's coming out. Yeah. But it's a joy to be able to take people back to the beginning and show them that there's a reason, and you can try to take control of these things and control of your life. And I just want to finish by saying what I think our job is to teach people the data, get them the data that is their data that belongs to them. It doesn't belong to the doctor, it doesn't belong to the hospital or office or wherever the heck you're going. It belongs to you. And if you track it over time, you can catch things very early, long before you become diagnosable. These are called subclinical conditions, as you well know, and then do something about it. So we could talk about the doing about it. We've got a program for that too. But the idea of living yourself out of what you've lived yourself into, if you have the data and the awareness and the motivation to make some changes, we're certainly here to help you, aren't we?
I love that. I love that. I mean, geez, I've often said that if I had a choice of what I would go back and study, I wouldn't do a PhD in anything. I'd go back and study physiology and biochemistry, because that would help me understand why people get sick and how to make them better. And you've given a beautiful 10-minute summary of just that. There's so much to unpack in what you've just said. And interestingly, when we talk about normal ranges, when doctors look at, oh no, you're within the normal range, that is determined, if I'm not wrong, by looking at population studies and finding what is average in the population, not what is ideal. Is that a fair comment?
Very fair comment. Average, or possibly the mean, which is a little different,
Yep.
than average. But it's if you're in range, you're okay, and if you're out of range, you're not okay. Well, that's a pretty silly way
Yes.
to look at. Well, isn't
Well,
there
particularly seeing that the vast majority of the
yes,
population are not well. So it's very reassuring to be told you're like that. But maybe, I mean, most people want to be better than that. So, this
better
is,
than that? So there's this weird word called optimum, which I'm not sure I love it so much, but pretend it's okay to use, and that there's an optimum level for you, whoever's listening, for you within that range. So here's the range of a broad population that might include people 20 years younger than you and 20 years older than you, with different experiences, different exposures, different everything, and they're all in there. So what's optimum for you may be discoverable, and there's what we call a functional range for you. And it could be age related, gender related, it could be a lot of things, but it's not anywhere in the range is good. We know that for sure. And so, because as let's say, take glucose, you're climbing, and the problem with the climbing is that hardly anyone is tracking now versus 3 years ago, versus 3 years before that, versus three. So where are you going? Because, blood sugar metabolism is really critical for health. I mean, it's just almost the root of all evil, if you want. And so, it could be said that could be said. So who's tracking? Now in America, everyone switches jobs, and that switches their insurance, and that switches their doctor. So the new doctor isn't looking at the old doctor's tests, and the person isn't really empowered. People are just sort of poking along, and oh well, they're just depending on what the physician might say. And as long as you're in range, you're okay. But what if you were, say, blood sugar 80 to 90? Those are the American measurements. And you're fine, but then all of a sudden you're at 95. Well, that's still within range, but it's climbing. And then the next year, and you've switched doctors now, and no one's looking at the old ones, and you're not tracking. Well, it's 95, it's 100, 95, 100, and you're still okay. And when it gets to 105 or 110, you might finally hear, and this is over a period of years. Well, you're just becoming less efficient at metabolizing glucose. Your diet's not changed, so it's you that's changed. You are losing, you're getting insulin sensitivity issues and other problems. And so when it's 110, you might hear from a physician, hey, you better watch this, or I'm going to have to medicate you. And that's the answer. So now if you don't change, they'll say do some diet and exercise, watch the carbs or something. And if you do, maybe you'll make a difference. But if you don't, it's just going to continue to climb. And of course, then you're going to have, all of a sudden you're on metformin because, you need some insulin sensitivity assistance. And you see what I'm getting at. So that's what I think is one of the major problems with standard medicine here or anywhere in the
Yes.
Five Eye countries. And so you've got no one track. So you've lived yourself into that glucose metabolism problem, and you can live yourself out of it if you can get the data. So I'm like the guy that's for you getting your own data. And I run thousands and thousands of labs. I've trained over 4,000 people how to run labs and look at it this way. Because remember, we don't diagnose and treat any specific disease. That's the realm of licensed medical practitioners. But we can still use the data for lifestyle changes. That's it. It's legal in all 50 states. And we have lots of practitioners in Australia and in New Zealand and in Canada, of course, in the United Kingdom. And
I definitely see the value in tracking with the same organization your tests and seeing how that changes over. This is something that I've noted in my own blood tests over the years, the change, and it is that change within you as an individual that is so critical. You mentioned, there are 4 areas of testing: saliva, blood, urine, and stool. And obviously there are some are more accessible than others. Let's start with saliva as an example of
sure.
what can we learn from our saliva? What can we learn from it?
Well, lots of things, because it's a bodily fluid and it has the chemicals and hormones and all kinds of things in it. We're mostly concerned with the hormones, with that catabolic, anabolic, because you can get cortisol, you can get DHEA, you can get all the sex hormones, or most of them, from saliva. And so you would just basically drool into these little tubes and send them into the lab.
Not having eaten for, is that, we know
No, you do it throughout the day. You would do what we want your circadian rhythm. So you would do a morning, noon, afternoon, and nighttime. If you wake up in the middle of the night, you could always do that too. And we take a look at melatonin, which is another hormone you can measure in saliva. And again, you can look at insulin. You can look at, as I said, the secretory IgA, part of the immune system. So there's lots and lots you can get from saliva. That's without going into digestive enzymes and the pH level of it and all this other stuff that could be important. But when you just want to look at stress and the effects of stress, you would look for those hormones. Now, the saliva makes it bioavailable. You're only looking at what your body's using. None of it's bound up. It's all free hormone. So it's not bound up by sex hormone binding globulins or the problems you have with blood testing. Plus, morning, noon, afternoon, nighttime, who would go to the doctor and get 4 venipunctures in a day? That alone would be so stressful, it would throw the results off, if you're measuring the effects of stress. And so saliva is convenient, it's affordable, and it's something you can control yourself. And it doesn't take a medical license to interpret the results from a functional point of view. There's no diagnosis in it. That's why physicians, for the most part, aren't using it. They prefer blood. They call that the gold standard. And it might be the gold standard when it comes to hormone replacement theory. So if you're just trying to, here's what's low and let's replace it, blood works very good. But we're looking for what's going on with the body, how stress affected you, what's it done to your hormones, and it's a different approach. We're actually, a different sandbox altogether.
Yeah, I love the idea of, so you would be testing with four different vials throughout the day. I think that's very accessible and would be very interesting. I mean, I've never done that myself, and I think that would be...
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, I have one of my mentors who lives in Australia, and we have a medical doctor there who is in the Sunshine Coast, who is our sort of overseer for Australia. I have trained many, many people in Australia how to do this, and I'm sure we could get you to... Where are you exactly, Ron?
I'm in Sydney. But I'm not in clinical practice anymore. But
and you don't have to be. Yeah. Just we could like to help you. So from saliva, it's mostly the hormones, and it's a very good medium. Again, convenient, inexpensive, and easy to do at home. You don't have to go see the doctor and get your arm stuck or anything like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Great. No, no. So there's saliva, and that I love the idea of the several vials testing through the day. And God, even wouldn't be a bad thing in the middle of the night to do it once and sit
To
up and
see what's going, yeah,
see what's going
depending,
on.
your circadian rhythm is, we're what we call diurnal animals. We're not
Mm,
nocturnal. We're diurnal, which means daytime.
hmm.
That's how we're designed.
Yeah.
I know people work night shift, and believe me, things get all messed up when
Mm.
you start.
Yeah. No,
But
we've done
so your
programs on that.
cortisol goes up high in the morning to make sure you're awake and your brain is on and your feet are hitting the floor and you're off and running, whatever it might be. Cortisol is very high. Again, it's your stress hormone, but it activates blood sugar metabolism and things like that. It's good for you in the
Mm,
morning. Now, you wouldn't want it that high at night. You wouldn't be able to sleep. And that's what's wrong with people is this diurnal rhythm is off. It
mm.
becomes like a roller coaster for some people. So we
Yeah.
want to see that. And by the way, saliva is the only way you can get that because it's the only medium that's real time. So if we measure you at 8 o'clock in the morning, that's what it is in the morning. Now at noon, it's changed. That won't show up in blood work, which is more of an average
Mm.
throughout the day. And so
pH.
you've got to use saliva.
Yeah. Read pH is another aspect of saliva that gives us what does pH tell you? You know what should it be, and what how do you
Yeah.
determine if it's out of balance?
The the digestive, the 10-second primer on the digestive system is you'd go alkaline in the mouth, acid in the stomach, alkaline in the upper bowel, and back to acid in the lower bowel or urinary tract. So it goes alkaline, acid, alkaline, acid. That's the normal rhythm. And that's very important to maintain also. People with acidic saliva, there's something wrong with you, and you're eating wrong for your type and all kinds of possibilities. If you don't have enough stomach acid, you're not going to be able to break down food very well. It's also very, very important as far as the immune system goes because you've got to kill little critters that come along with your food, and your stomach's perfectly designed. It's got hydrochloric acid, pepsin. You're breaking down the food, and that's good for digestion, and then the assimilation happens later. It's also a signal. A strong HCl, hydrochloric acid, is very, very important. When the stomach gets working on a bowl of food that you just ate, it's down there and it's working it and it's moving it. There's automatic muscles that are mixing it up, and the acid is actually increasing, and the pH will drop down about 1.2 or 2, which is very acidic. And that's the signal for the pyloric valve to open up, to let that food into the small intestine where you're going to get the bile and the lipase, which are actually back to alkaline. So that's a good thing you start hitting, especially the fat. The stomach's good for protein and polysaccharides, but it's going to be in the small intestine where your fat breakdown and absorption happens much more efficiently. Again, the bile and the lipase from the pancreas, bile from the gallbladder,
Hmm.
storing it in as a favor to the liver and so on. And so it's really, really interesting.
And
Um,
then we go back into the large intestine, which is more acid.
Back to yes, stool should be more acid.
Mm.
Now you're talking about small variations,
Yes.
but like after the stomach, because that's the strongest one, obviously.
Mm.
And so we're looking at a lot of that more as uh, sub or consequential to the other labs that we do.
Mm.
So you asked for about saliva, and I
Mm.
told you it's convenient and inexpensive, and it's real time, so you can get the different times of the day, and it
Mm.
measures really tiny amounts really well. These are all certified labs. They're highly regulated. They have to be producing good, and they get checked out all the time. So we're confident in our labs' accuracy. Now remember, the dominoes are starting to fall.
Hmm.
So the next test we'd have everybody do on top of their saliva test is another easy to do at home. You're going to collect some urine and you're going to pour it on some special strips and you're going to let them dry. So it's called a dried urine test. And that makes it very inexpensive and easy to ship. So these things are designed for the person to put the power in the hands of the people. So you got your saliva. Now your urine, we're going to look at that next domino. We're going to look at the dysbiosis, and we can see it's a measurement called indican. And you know what? Doctors used to do this 60 years ago. When I was a kid, when you went into the doctor's office, they would always collect a urine sample. Why? Because they had their own little lab in the back, and they could do things and tell you something and get it all over with at one time. No, oh, you got to go to you're over here and get your samples taken, and it's just they used to do it. And indican was one of the markers that told them if you had a dysbiosis. And depending on the way the person shows up, they could even do a good diagnosis for leaky gut, even from that one cheap test. Pardon me, but it's very inexpensive. Now, as long as you're collecting urine, you're going to measure some other things too, like that UBAS, the urinary bile acid sulfates, which are a marker for liver congestion. And it's really fascinating that you can get those from a simple urine collection. And with the same urine collection, we're also going to look at what we call oxidative stress. And it's called 8-OHDG. The long form is 8-hydroxydeoxyguanosine, if you really want to know. But 8-OHDG, is what we call it. And it's a measure of oxidative stress, which is a killer. You hear about free radicals and all this damage that the environment's doing to us, especially if you smoke or something like that. But even just normal air these days. I know Australia is a very big country, a lot of open space, but it's still on the same planet as San Francisco and these other places that are polluting the hell out of the place.
And most of us live in big cities. The vast majority live in
lots of automobiles and things. And so, they've measured some of these toxins on the top of Mount Everest. And here in the United States, the highest mountain is Mount Rainier in Washington State. My son has climbed it twice and peaked both times. And there's toxins in the snow up there. So you can't get away from this stuff. And one of the major ways that it affects us is through oxidation. It increases free radicals. And so you've heard pro-oxidation, and it's actually normal. There's a normal amount. And there's antioxidation. Antioxidants are very common in foods. And then there's other phytonutrients that could be very important. But the idea is that with a simple saliva test and urine test, we just covered an awful lot of, here's the word, healing opportunities. Healing opportunities. These are not medical diagnoses. We're not stepping on anyone's toes or peeing in their backyard one bit. We leave the diagnosis to those that are licensed to do so. We're just looking for healing opportunities, which is a way for us to work with Mr. Jones and Mrs. Smith or whoever on here's what's really wrong. Here are some improvements you can make by looking at the data. And oh, by the way, it's going to correlate perfectly with how you feel. So you explain why you feel so rotten. And then there's other, so again, and now you're seeing how the dominoes fall. And we'd also talk about blood. Now we do have, we'd like to get a blood draw too. Don't get me wrong. But this next test is simply a finger stick. So you shake your hand and you get the little kit and you got the little card out on your desk here. You can do it right in front of me. And I take my finger and I'll just turn it red like that. See how it's just turning bright red? And then you poke it. They give you a little poker. It doesn't really hurt. And it starts dripping. You got to drip that blood out onto the blotter. And the next thing you know, you're wiping it clean and you put a little Band-Aid on it. Now you've just collected enough blood to run the next series of tests, which includes zonulin, diamine oxidase, and histamine. So DAO for short, diamine oxidase. So you look at this zonulin, and that tells you if your breakdown and the dominoes have fallen so far as to actually create leaky gut. remember the saliva test. Hey, lots of stress, sex hormone problems. Secretory IgA is low, or it could be high, and each one would tell you that it's not normal. And then you got the dysbiosis showing up on the urine test. You got the liver dysfunction and the oxidative stress, not to mention now with the finger stick, you're looking at leaky gut.
Yeah.
And the histamine diamine oxidase, look at a ratio there. You can actually start visualizing the condition of the villi, the microvilli, and the spaces between the villi are called crypts. Very, very important to have all that be top notch. And the way it was designed, and let's give some credit to the designer. I believe the innate intelligence of the body is what we want to coach up the innate intelligence of the body. We're not trying to cure anything. The body heals itself, or it doesn't. But if it does, it's because you're supporting and nurturing these functions. You've identified healing opportunities, not medical diagnosis.
I love that.
And
nice
turn
of phrase. Nice turn of phrase there, Rick.
Well, take it. It's yours now.
No, I love the turn of phrase, healing opportunity, and interesting the whole leaky gut story, because of course nutritionists, naturopaths particularly, have been talking about this for 40 or 50 years, but it's only since zonulin and what is now referred to as intestinal permeability, it's been accepted as, hey, actually that does go on in the body. Sure. I love these accessible. I love this pin-prick test and this urine test, and I do remember when my doctor used to do that. Mm-hmm. Something that I hear a lot when I see patients was, they'd come in with chronic, degenerative diseases, and when you go into the diet, oh no, my diet is perfect. No, don't even worry about that. It's perfect. There's an issue that a lot of people, and practitioners included, don't understand, and that is the difference between a food allergy and a food sensitivity. Can you talk to us about food sensitivity, that difference, and how we would determine food sensitivities?
Well, I'd hope to be able to clarify that. Allergies you already know about because you've had them most of your life. They're kind of inborn errors, and like dogs, for instance. And I'll tell you a quick story. Cats. So I had a cat for 15 years. Loved my cat. Cat would all over the house and plays, bedroom, everything. Just loved my cat. But when it died, I noticed that the sores in my nose that had been chronic, they'd been there for over 10. I couldn't remember when they started. So I had these little sores in my nose. They went away. And I thought, that damn cat, it's because of the reaction I had as an allergy. Now, people are allergic to tomatoes or strawberries or whatever the heck. They usually know about it because the action is instant. It's through. We talked earlier about secretory IgA. Well, there's IgE, which is the immediate, more of a histamine type response. And you should know. You start sneezing, your eyes are watering, your skin's turning red. Whatever it is. Now, so these sensitivities are different. They're more subtle. And they take longer for the symptom to appear. So you could eat that food on Tuesday, and a symptom may not show up until Thursday or even Friday. So now, how do you put that together? You just all of a sudden on Friday feel like crap. Your joints are aching, your whatever it might be. Digestive problems, headaches, sleepiness, tired. It doesn't matter. Foggy thinking is huge in this. So we measure two different ways for food sensitivities. One is we talked about IgA, we mentioned IgE, which is IgG is one, but it's not as good as what we call the mediator release test. And right now it's not available in Australia, which is very unfortunate. We have to build a lab down there. But the testing we do to make it clear is so important because everybody has some sensitivities. I'll give you another quick story. I talked about the cat and my nose and things. So very early on, well over 20 years ago, lady came in our office. I tell the story often, so if you've seen my podcasts, you might know this one. But I got a zillion of them, but I love this one because this lady came in the office Ron, and she was on about her 8th visit for chiropractic and acupuncture. We had a multiple disciplinary office. Now I was a greeter and the ham of the place and the lab guy, so I always was triaging. And so I'm walking this lady back to her treatment room, and I could tell she's very sad. And I said, "Hey, first name, what's going on today?" "Oh, Reed, I'm just so frustrated. This weight that I'm carrying is 40 pounds. And you know me, I'm ready to say something happy and encouraging. Oh no, wasn't going to happen that day. She said, "I'm so discouraged by this weight, and it's 40 pounds, and I can't get rid of it because I'm on this medication for the hives, big red blotchy patches all over her skin, all over her body, which would happen for no apparent reason. And the only solution she'd been offered was medication that made her gain weight. She'd been on it for 2 years and was 40 pounds plus. And it's not funny at all, but the poor lady, I'm understanding, yeah, okay. And she goes, "And Reed, I went to the doctor the other day to get a checkup, and I told him how frustrated I was with the 40 pounds. And he told her, lady, you can be fat or you can have the hives. Take your pick."
Wow.
And now I'm like kind of opening my eyes going, "Hey, no wonder you look so bad today." But then she says, "And so, Reed, I told him that was very depressing, and he said he'd be happy to write a prescription for antidepressants."
Yep.
So when I finally was able to get a word in edgewise,
Mm-hmm.
I said, "Hey, first name, why didn't you ever try to find out why you get the hives?" And this light bulb went on, and her head snapped around so hard, I thought, "You're not going to need your chiropractic treatment today."
Mm-hmm.
I mean, really, like, what? What do you mean? I said, "I'm not sure. We could probably find out why you get the hives if you're willing to invest in the right testing." So that's one story about food sensitivity testing, where within 9 days after she ran the test, we got the results, we explained what she needed to do. Within 9 days, she was off her medication, calling her physician, Ron, and saying, "I'm off this medication. I found out why I get the hives." What a concept.
What a concept. What a concept.
What a concept.
Well, Reed, we don't have a $1.5 trillion US pharmaceutical industry without medical practitioners facilitating it. And that is a pretty good example of multi-drug treatment for what actually, if you bothered to look at root cause, you would tick a lot of boxes, a lot more than you'd think. So what a great story. How do we test? I mean, okay, you were saying
that requires a blood draw. That one, and you can't. So I told you I have a doctor who's oversees our stuff in Australia, in Sunshine Coast, which is near you, I think.
Well, it's not far, and I have a feeling I probably have interviewed that doctor. What's his name? Do you remember?
His name is Sandeep Gupta.
I have, and Sandeep has been a guest on my program, and I would encourage people to go back and have a listen to his wonderful podcast. I mean, I've been a holistic practitioner for 40 years, but I learnt so much from him in my interview. So I thought that would be who you would be working with.
He's one of our medical directors, and I've known him for 15 years. And
he's a very interesting guy.
Good as gold, and quite a gentleman, and a funny guy too. He's also quite a musician. When he comes to the house here, I have a music room, and he's plays the bass and the bongos and stuff. He's quite a guy.
Yep.
But and now I kind of forget.
He's very into environmental, particularly mold. Mold issues, and yes, it's very interesting. We might even re-release that podcast in the same week.
Sure,
we do yours.
Yeah, Dr. Gupta. Anyway, Fascinating guy, and he'll tell you what the alternatives are in Australia. We're trying to get access to all the labs we run here in the States. In Australia, we're doing really good in Canada and United Kingdom, but Australia, New Zealand, just a little behind, but still we're working on it to get access to this. So that test. Now here's the thing. Yes, that lady got rid of the hives. She found the underlying cause, which was her main complaint. Now I had another woman who had migraine headaches, and she was in a dark room with a pillow over her head 5 days a week.
Wow.
Couldn't work, really couldn't afford anything. And so, but she did invest in this one lab and found out she had some sensitivities. And within 3 weeks, never had another migraine. I'll tell you another thing where this food sensitivity testing came in. And then I want to explain a very important principle. So one of my clients way back in the day was doing very well. And she asked if I work with children. And I said, yeah, I'm a football coach. I've been coaching for 15 years. I've coached hundreds of kids, and I've raised 4. So she goes, okay, well, why? You know, she said, oh, they want to send my kid home from school due to misbehavior if I don't put him on drugs. So the school's telling her, put him on drugs, or we're kicking him out of school. Right. And I asked first I said, she said they want to put him on Ritalin, which was the drug of choice back then for ADD. I said, well, do you think he has a Ritalin deficiency? And that, tongue in cheek, and I thought it was funny, and she didn't think it was funny one bit. She said, no, that's not funny. She goes, I don't want to put my kid on drugs. And I said, okay, I understand. You know, so like, who's doing it? Is it a doctor at the school? She said, no, it's the principal and the teacher. Actually prescribing medicine for a young, by the way, this kid's 9 and they wanted to drug him. He's 9. I think he's probably being almost a normal boy, in my view. I'm sure I was much worse at 9 years old than he was.
But the point being, you identify the food sensitivity. How do you actually specifically
drag it out? But I'll just tell you the end of the story. Within 3 weeks of putting him on a different diet and homework schedule and exercise and boost that up about 3 times, the principal of the school called me, tracked me down through the mother and said, boy, he's a different kid. He pays attention. He's not poking the other kids. He's not outbursting inappropriately. He's just a whole different boy, which I thought was wonderful, and I'm all happy. And then he goes, what'd you put him on? Unfortunately, he thought it was some magic pill, you know, and it certainly isn't. So I just wanted to you asked me about food sensitivities. There's 3 quick ones about how important it is for some people, because the food sensitivity, this is really important, was a major healing opportunity. It was a major contributing factor to their downward spiral and what I call metabolic chaos. You can borrow this one too. I have one diagnosis. You have metabolic chaos. And that's what it is. And it's always multiple causes, Ron. We're probably running out of time, but here's the deal. So multiple causal factors, including foods, and sometimes those foods are really, really important. Now, so I test everyone for food sensitivities, but looking forwards, I can't tell I'm going to have that kind of sort of miraculous compensation, you know. So depending on the level of the sensitivities, may be a major contributor. Oh my God, get off them and you're better. Or they could be a minor contributor, and you never know. So looking forwards, can't tell who's going to help the most. Looking backwards, thank God we ran that test, right? So that's how that sensitivity.
How do you specifically identify the food that they are sensitive to?
It's a blood test. So and that's why we can't do it in Australia just yet, because the blood has to be delivered overnight to the lab. The lab has to have the blood, 3 big vials of it, which is why we can't do infants. You know, we could go down to about 4 years old, 6 years old, and get enough blood.
And then we get a quantitative immune response to various foods.
Yes, it's immune system, but it's not immunoglobulin based. It's what's called mediator release based. So we expose the blood to various antigens, food particles, if you will. Right now it's at 176 different foods.
Wow. Okay.
No one eats that many foods. You probably eat 30. I might eat around 30 or 40. But most people only eat 14 or 18 different foods. It's kind of rotten, really. You should eat much more variety. But anyway, so it'll give you the bad foods and the good foods, and you switch to the good foods. And I've seen miracles occur. But I've seen where, it wasn't the foods, or they contributed, minor way or less important. So it's other things, environmental pollutants, household cleaning products, personal care products, new draperies outgassing, your new car, not to mention driving in traffic. There's just so many different contributors to metabolic chaos.
Reid, you've given us so much. You've talked about catabolic, anabolic. You've talked about healing opportunities, which I love that expression. You've also mentioned metabolic chaos, and so many conditions now are being seen as metabolic diseases, physical and mental, and the focus is really on mitochondrial function. In all of the testing that you do, is there a test or parameters that give you a clue as to whether metabolic function, mitochondrial activity is not working as it should?
Well, one of them is in the mitochondrial DNA. So we look for oxidative stress, as I mentioned. There's some other tests, but remember that we want to look at a whole, I call it a constellation of healing opportunities. So because everyone's already been to a functional medicine doctor and ran a test, and here's the problem that they do that I see it is that physicians are using what I call the sounds like method. So a person shows up and they have a cluster of symptoms, and they'll go, well, that sounds like XYZ. And then they'll run that test. Like thyroid's a perfect example. If you're tired, fatigued, can't lose weight, you're maybe sad, you have a cold or numb extremities, and you're constipated, that sounds like thyroid. So the doctor might run a thyroid test, and then God forbid they find low thyroid hormones and high thyroid stimulating hormones. They would go, oh, I found your problem. You're hypothyroid. Pat myself on the back. I found your problem. Well, it's never just one thing. And so whether it's mitochondrial dysfunction or organ dysfunction, hormone imbalances, it doesn't really matter what it is. If you're not looking at a whole constellation of healing factors or what we call contributors to metabolic chaos, then you're going to be beating your head against the wall. You're going to be going around and around again. So because with the sounds like method, oh, it's hypothyroidism. And sure enough, with certain medication, the symptoms might abate a little bit, a little more energy. But then, the person might then go back to the doctor and go, well, I have a little more energy and I lost a couple pounds, but I got this other thing. I can't put on muscle. My libido's still low and whatever. Well, what does that sound like? Sounds like low testosterone. So you test. Yep. Here's your now you're treating two different. So that's the diagnosis and treatment model, and the same thing you be applied to mitochondria and any other function. It's always going to be multiple causal factors. This is why, again, we run multiple labs, multiple healing opportunities. And here's the thing you won't hear anyone else run. If I haven't said it already, multiple causal factors are having an effect on each other that can't be singly measured. And that's coming from a guy who teaches a course in lab work. Like I'm kind of known as a lab expert. And I'm telling you, there isn't enough labs. We can't measure some of these interactions singly. Therefore, you have to look at the whole pattern and connect the dots. You can't just treat one dot or even two. You really have to look at what I said originally was hormone, immune, digestion, detoxification, energy production, which would involve mitochondrial function, and nervous system. And so we look at it all together. And you could add in oxidative stress. We also test for food sensitivities. We do a complete and thorough examination of the microbiome. And so there's a lot of moving parts, but with a system it's not perfect by any means. I keep saying we're still working on it, but it's been working really well for people for over 20 years. I've been teaching it since 2008. I have thousands of practitioners using that system it's really mindset. And I know I said earlier that a methodology is a method, steps, like we have our labs, but it's the way you think about it. The ology part is the science of or way you think about it. So a methodology is what I'm here to say is something we think we've done a pretty good job on. And that idea of HIDDEN, hidden stressors, hidden contributors to metabolic chaos, hidden and multiple healing opportunities, how they affect each other, and then what to do about it. The diet, rest, exercise, stress reduction, supplementation. There's no one magic pill for anything. I told you about the story of the little boy who showed up as a new kid, and the principal, he was so different, the principal tracked me down and unfortunately said, "What'd you put him on?" Instead of understanding the entire, better bedtime schedule, better exercise. Matter of fact, tripled his exercise. People don't know that boys should exercise every day until they're beat. That's how you maintain a young man's health, is exercise the hell out of them. And they won't get in any trouble. They'll be sharp. They'll sleep well. They'll do their homework when they have to.
They'll be hungry for proper food.
Eat better appetite, and so on and so on. Yeah, you get it. So the answer to your question is a little, in a way, I just simplified it. Yes. I may not have even answered it directly.
No, but I like that answer, and I think it's interesting because what I've observed, and I know many practitioners in the functional health, integrative health space, and I know many practitioners who are prescription driven in a 10 to 15 minute appointment schedule. I know, but the thing is
that's generous. The average appointment here in the States is 9 minutes.
Yeah, I was being generous. I think it's probably not that different.
It takes 20 minutes to write the bill up, but the appointment was 9 minutes.
But my point is that we have been programmed. All of those have been programmed to look for the one answer. Persons come in, I've given you the symptoms, doc, tell me what's wrong with me. And sometimes people feel like, hang on, this is a whole range of different things. And some people feel disappointed, many feel empowered. It's part of the whole philosophy of how we've been trained to look at healthcare, really, isn't it?
Yes, you're right. People are often thankful for a diagnosis because at least someone gave them an answer. It could be the wrong diagnosis, but they feel great that they have one, especially when it's what we call a waist scan diagnosis, like fibromyalgia, chronic, these things. It's multiple symptoms, multiple causes. It's happened over a long period of time. It's definitely the person who's suffering has contributed to that. It's not something they caught. It's not a transferable disease. It's a degenerative, stress-related condition, and you can't just label it and say, "Here's your pills." You'll never fix anybody that way.
Listen, you've given us so much there with the saliva, with the blood, the pinprick test, the urine dipstick test. I love all of that. You mentioned microbiome, and I'm assuming there isn't. Is there a dipstick test for stool sampling?
No, it's with saliva and urine and even the finger stick, it requires stool collection. So it's not as much fun as some of the other tests, but it's pretty easy. You go like a puppy on paper and you put it in the right thing and you send it in. It's really kind of easy, and it's done at home, so it's very convenient, and it's not real expensive the way we do it. Microbiome testing involves the stool collection, and then again that goes in. They will process it. I've been to where they process it. It's very interesting, but I have to say that some of the most recent stool testing I don't think it's as good as some of the old stool testing, because it's all done by machine now, but it's still very helpful. So in the old days, you would have a guy in the lab who would use a microscope and shine different lights and put stains, and they would personally sort of become experts at identifying things that didn't belong there, like bug parts, if you want, arms and legs or whatever it might be, and certain cells, of course. Some parasites are actually one single cell. So it's very interesting that they don't do a lot of microscopy anymore. Also stool culturing, to put swabs of the stool in various petri dishes and put those into an incubator and see what kind of fuzz grows on it. That's very important. At least in the old days, that's what we did. Now it's all done by PCR, sort of like genetic testing to look for the genes of the animals or critters or
Yep.
whatever you're looking for. And you're able to run a lot of labs very quickly on in that way. It's when you take out the human equation, you get faster turnaround time and things like that.
But getting the sample, I mean, we're in Australia, you're in America. There's a certain you can't really do that, can you?
Yeah,
Can you?
you
That's a
can.
question.
It's
That's a
actually
question.
well, the real challenge is live blood because we need our blood for our food sensitivity testing, which I explained to be overnighted. And the lab is in Florida,
Yep.
and if you can't get the live blood, and I'm talking about fresh, warm red blood, and you don't freeze it, you just got to get it overnight to the lab. And so anywhere and they have a similar lab in Poland, believe it or not. So our European friends if they can get it overnight to the lab in Poland. So there's only 2 labs in the world running that test. So for food sensitivities, for those people, we do use the finger stick, and it's a different way of looking at things, but it could be very effective. You can identify foods that you need to get rid of, and foods that might actually be pretty safe. So it just depends. And we're working with labs in Australia now to get more access for my graduates because Australia's got some funny rules.
Yeah, yeah. Listen, you've given us so much, and you've given us so much to think about, and you've put it in such a great and understandable way. I can see
Hope
you've
so.
been teaching. You've been teaching for all those years. You're clearly good at what you're doing. I want to ask one last question, and this is, take a step back from your teaching, from your role as in functional medicine, because we are all individuals on a health journey through life in this modern world. What do you think the biggest challenge is for us as individuals on that journey?
Oh, it could be a lot of things. I think point of view is a big one. Um, how you look at the world, is it the cup half full or half empty? So I think the healthier people seem to be the ones who have a good point of view and outlook, and they're not as pessimistic. They're optimistic. They're just less challenged facing their challenges. They take things on. We call it ready, willing, and able. So if you're ready, willing, and able, that's a good thing. If you're not really ready yet, and you're not so willing, like to change, I don't want to give up. I had a lady tell me, as long as I don't have to give up my bowl of ice cream before bedtime, I'll do anything you ask me to do. And I said, well, that's the one thing that's probably going to make the biggest change in your life. Give up that bowl of ice cream before bed. So you got to be ready. So you need to be able to make the investment and the time, and maybe have some support around you. You got to be willing to, maybe it's not going to be as comfortable as you want. It's not, you can't come home every day after work and eat a bag of chips. You just, there's some discipline involved sometimes, and that's where the ability. So ready, willing, and able, and that could mean a lot of things. So get up ready, willing, and able to make some decisions, do some things that are going to benefit you when you're not going to see the results right away. That is the biggest challenge, I think, is, if you have 40 pounds to lose, that's going to take a while. So try to lose 5 and look at that as positive and good. And again, the cup is half full. Well, good. Now you only have 35 pounds to lose. Or if that's your goal, weight loss. For other people, it's, again, like I told you the story about the hives and migraines and ADD and the asthma. I've seen asthma go away in 3 weeks. And that's a kid that was on an asthma inhaler. Was embarrassed and didn't want to. The reason I knew is because, I told you I coach football. He didn't want to come to practice because he was embarrassed to carry his inhaler around. And the mom came to me and said, let's call him Billy, can Billy still play on the game Saturday if he doesn't practice during the week? And I said, no, you can't come and play on Saturday. You got to hang out with the rest of the kids and learn the plays and things that we're doing. So anyway, so this kid had asthma, and within 3 weeks, he never had another asthma attack. So I'm telling you that some things are quick like that, but when it's slow improvements, that's the body takes time to heal. That's when you got to carry that mental attitude around with you, I think. Mine comes from, I'm not agnostic. I have a rock solid belief, and it's my ground. I give every day, and I thank God for, all the blessings. And then the rest of the day seems to go okay. Or, if it doesn't, it's still okay.
Well, I mean, gratitude is a powerful thing, and I'm very grateful to you for joining us today and sharing your knowledge and wisdom with us. And we'll have links to all of that, and I'm going to order some of those tests myself. So thank you so much for joining us
My
today.
pleasure, Ron. It's anytime kind of a thing. If you get any inquiries and they want you to have me back, tell me what you want to talk about. We can go into detail on some of these things that are actually pretty exciting. Anytime,
I'll
Ron.
take you up on that. Thank you. Well, we'll have links to Reed's website, the Functional Diagnostic Nutrition program there, and the people that he has trained. And if you are interested in pursuing some of those tests, which I certainly am, I will be visiting with one of those doctors here in Australia. I think some of those tests, which are so simple and shed some interesting light on our health, are worth doing, worth benchmarking. I'd also encourage you to join our Unstress Health community. There are so many wonderful benefits and resources there, and the advisory panel is growing by the day. We will be organising some events, live Q&As and live events in the coming 6 to 12 months. So I would encourage you to join our community. I hope this finds you well. Until next time, this is Dr. Ron Ehrlich. Be well. This podcast provides general information and discussion about medicine, health and related subjects. The content is not intended and should not be construed as medical advice or as a substitute for care by a qualified medical practitioner. If you or any other person has a medical concern, he or she should consult with an appropriately qualified medical practitioner. Guests who speak in this podcast express their own opinions, experiences and conclusions.